Painting a waterfall is an exercise of capturing movement with colour and texture. Expressing the turbulent energy of a waterfall can be tricky, but it makes for a dynamic and fun subject. In this tutorial, I'll show you how to paint cascading waterfalls with gouache, along with techniques for rendering mossy rocks and autumn trees. For this painting, I used gouache paints in titanium white, spectrum red, burnt umber, yellow ochre, primary yellow, permanent green, ultramarine blue, and ivory black. I'm using cold pressed paper, a mix of round, rigger and square watercolour brushes and a sealable palette to keep my paints fresh. I start by taping the edges of the paper for a clean border, then I'll sketch out the composition using broad, simple shapes for the pools of water, rocks, waterfall and trees. At this stage, I focus on the overall placement of elements rather than drawing any details. I draw simple shapes to represent different sections of the painting to block in where they will be placed. In the centre of the painting, curving around the horizon line, is the waterfall, which acts as the main focal point. This is surrounded by trees, which act as framing elements, drawing the viewer's eye towards the focal point. There are quite a lot of different elements in this painting, with the trees, lake, waterfalls and rocks, but for now all I need to know is their position in the painting and rough shape. Understanding compositional principles is the key to creating a great artwork, and creating an accurate sketch can make or break a painting. So if you'd like to master drawing by learning these skills and more, a guided course can help you improve more quickly. I quickly want to tell you about the drawing course I created. It's an online course designed for beginners that covers the fundamentals of drawing, then progresses to showing you how to create realistic portrait drawings through practical online sessions. Through 55 lessons, I will help you build your skills up from complete beginner to drawing portraits like this, through practicing how to control the pencil, improving line quality and composition, constructing complex forms and proportions from scratch, and perfecting your shading. So if you're a complete beginner and not really sure where to start, this course is an all-in-one program that will take you from the absolute basics to more advanced techniques so that you can have a skill that you can enjoy for a lifetime. I'd absolutely love to have you join me. I put a link in the description so you can check out the details. Now I have my drawing done, so let's add some colour. I'm starting with the sky, which is a light blue mix of titanium white and a tiny dot of ultramarine blue. Not much sky is visible, so I'll just fill in the top corner. Next, I'm going to block in the dark and neutral tones that will serve as an underpainting. I've mixed a dark sap green colour using burnt umber, permanent green, ivory black and yellow ochre. I add water to make the paint more transparent and apply a wash over the areas for distant rocks and water, concentrating the pigment in the darker sections. I'm applying it roughly since I'll be layering on top of it. This green tone appears in most of the shadow areas, providing continuity throughout the painting. Working from the background forward, I'll start on the distant trees. Using a square brush helps me avoid getting lost in detail. So I've mixed a brighter green with more permanent green and also a darker shade with more ivory black. Dabbing these three green tones on the paper, I can form clusters of leaf shapes and establish shadows. For the rocks mixed in with the trees, I'll use a darker greyish background colour. The faraway waterfall which cuts through these rocks, spilling over the edge of the hill, flows downwards to the middle towards this pool of water. The waterfall appears white in tone due to the turbulent water trapping air bubbles as it cascades through the valley. These bubbles and broken droplets refract light. So for this, I mix titanium white with a tiny dot of ivory black and use a round brush to outline the flow. This waterfall flows diagonally, hits a rock and changes direction. For the wider section of the waterfall with more spray, I'll use a stippling or dotting motion to create the texture of flowing water. I'll establish the main S-curve flow and add dots of spray around it, finishing with a white line where the water crashes into the pool below. Since this is an autumn scene, I'll introduce warm orange tones for the turning leaves in the trees in the background. I'll mix spectrum red with yellow ochre and burnt umber and dot it in clusters in the background forest. This subtle detail adds warmth and variety to the otherwise cool composition. Working from the background elements to the foreground, the next closest section of the painting to the viewer is the pool of water in the middle, before the closest waterfall. I'm quite simply going to use the same dark neutral green tone that I used for the background rocks to establish the base tone of the water. I'm blocking this in as a large section with my square brush, adding quite a bit of water to the mix so the paint flows off the brush. This pool is shrouded by the trees and reflecting the dark rocks, so it will appear as a similar dark colour apart from where the light is streaming through. After the water pool colour has dried, I'm going to add some water details and lighter reflections with a colour that I mixed from the white I used for the waterfall that was already on my palette and a tiny amount of the dark green that's on my palette. First, I use this colour to create some more texture and variety in the details in the waterfall by dotting some subtle shadows around the top to create a softer edge where the waterfall comes into view. Then I use the fine tip of my round brush and the same colour to create some fine organic thin lines which curve around the base of the plunge pool the waterfall has formed to represent ripples in the water that are catching the light. There are some brighter, more white highlights amongst these ripples, so I detail these where I imagine the light is hitting. Around the crest of the waterfall, the water appears more transparent in this curved line, so we're seeing the rocks and some mineral deposits through the water. This appears like a brighter line that's yellow-green in tone that I added some primary yellow paint to the green mix on my palette to create. Next, I block in the darker rock tones of the foreground waterfall face. Using the dark neutral green, I paint in downward strokes to establish a sense of movement, which I will follow later with white paint for the water. I'll also block in the foreground pool with this same dark colour. Now, I begin painting the foreground waterfall with the light grey-white mixture from earlier. I paint the water in thin lines with the fine tip of my round brush, following the direction of the flow. I use the lighter grey first, then a darker grey to establish the shape of the waterfall, which I'll brighten with whiter highlights later. The shadows in the waterfall will be a mid-tone bluish grey, which I mix from titanium white, a little ultramarine blue, and a touch of ivory black. So next, with pure white paint, I use a dotting motion to create the texture of fine bubbles. I repeat this in downward curving lines along the waterfall's face, leaving some of the dark underpainting visible to represent small rocks. To emphasise these rocks, I'll apply a transparent glaze of ivory black to paint the small organic rock shapes. I continue layering bluish grey tones in dotted lines to create water texture in the shadow areas. On top of these mid-greys, I'll layer the lighter highlights with my round brush, dotting the reflected light mostly at the top of the waterfall. I want to darken the foreground pool, so I add ivory black to my green mix and layer on a darker tone, leaving some of the lighter underpainting to show through as ripples. Where the water crashes into the plunge pool, a blue shadow is cast over the foam, so I add more ultramarine to my grey mix to emphasise this area. I use the bluish grey to detail ripples and streams of bubbles in the turbulent water, painting organic curved lines. To the right of this lower pool, the water is reflecting more light. I'll use a dry brush technique to layer on lighter grey tones. By loading the brush with paint, removing excess moisture and then picking up more pigment, the brush picks up the paper's texture, creating soft edges for the ripples. I layer darker ripples back over this mid-tone grey for shadow details, then add a brighter white grey tone for more definition. Now for the moss on the foreground rocks, I dotted on a brighter sap green where the moss is illuminated. So for the highlights, I added titanium white and primary yellow to my green mix. The white increases opacity while the yellow boosts saturation, preventing a chalky finish. I'm dotting this intense green where I want mossy highlights, which adds depth and dimension to the painting. The final stage is the painting of the trees that frame our waterfall. I'll start with the tree on the right, lining the trunk and branches with a mix of burnt umber and ivory black using a rigger brush. This brush is ideal for fine flowing lines. Branches get thinner as they extend from the trunk and split off. Varying their direction makes the tree look more lifelike. I then dot leaf textures over the branches with mid-tone greens and brighter yellow greens. For the trees on the left, the leaves will cover a large portion of the sky and background rocks, so I started by dotting in the leaf texture in clusters that covered the sky over which the branches stretched. This framing element helps draw the viewer's eye right to the waterfall, and the light is coming from behind these leaves, which backlights them and makes them appear brighter, so I mixed a green with more white and primary yellow to increase the lightness of the tone. And there we have it, an autumn waterfall painting with gouache. I have some other gouache painting tutorials, check them out if you're interested in creating other scenes. And then I've also added some links to my drawing course, ebook, and the supplies I used in this video in the description. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please like and subscribe to let me know. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.